This is Monday, the 16th of November. This is American history. Now, this is the map that you will see on the quiz next week. The places that you need to know. Obviously, up here is San Francisco, and down here is Los Angeles. This is Mexico City, and this is Buena Vista. And there should be an X on your map drawn right about there. That's where Santa Fe is. Now, you'll need to know all of these because one or all of them will be on the quiz. Now, please understand that while the war is being fought, there is absolutely no reporting on it. We know that the major battles are fought in 1847, but we don't know how they turned out. There is no telephone, there is no telegraph, there is no television. It takes months for word to get about what has occurred. Now, many of the Whigs in Congress were opposed to the war being started in the first place and feel that the war is nothing more than a land grab by the slave states in hopes of making more states that will have slave than free. Now, of course, one of the Whigs was a congressman by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And you can see from this quote here that he was bitterly opposed to the war. He felt that it was unjust and that it was simply a stronger nation working against a weaker nations. Now, one of the leading lights of the anti-war, one of the Whigs, is Henry David Thoreau. Now, Henry David Thoreau comes out of this New England school of literature. He was a firm believer that we were doing nothing more than taking advantage of Mexico. Thoreau is an essayist. He is someone who writes essays that then are published in newspapers. Thoreau is also somebody who is a philosopher. We're going to get into Thoreau's philosophy in just a few moments. During the summer of 1847, with opposition to the war mounting, Polk is going to send Nicholas Trist, a fellow congressman, to Mexico. And Trist's job is to negotiate a surrender. Now, when Trist arrives in Mexico, he will meet with General Scott, and he will determine that the Americans have defeated the Mexicans in several places. And so he will go into the peace treaty with strength. Now, the peace treaty is called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Guadalupe Hidalgo is, I guess, what we would probably today call a suburb of Mexico City. Well, we won, so we should get most of the prizes. We received the land along the Rio Grande River, that land that was in dispute. We're also going to receive what is called the Mexican Cession. Now, the Mexican Cession is California, Arizona, Nevada, parts of Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. It is also at this time that the United States is planning on building a transcontinental railroad. Now, the original Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo said that the boundary between the United States and Mexico would be here, the Salt River. But engineers said to the administration that they might need land farther to the south to build the railroad. So James Gadsden, who was a congressman, is going to go down to Mexico and purchase the Gadsden Purchase for $10 million. So, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we get land. We also agree to pay Mexico a sum of money for the pain and suffering that we have inflicted. And then, I guess this would be during the Buchanan administration. That would be about 10 years later. We purchased the Gadsden Purchase. Now, Polk is the last of the Jacksonian presidents. And one of the things that comes out of Jacksonian times, particularly in the 1840s and 1850s, is what's known as transcendentalism. Now, prior to this time period, the United States had pretty much followed what I guess I would call European philosophy. Philosophy is how you live your life. But the United States is going to turn to a different form of philosophy, transcendentalism. Well, what exactly is transcendentalism? Transcendentalism is the rejection of previous cultures. Transcendentalists believe that nature holds the key to our existence. Now, transcendentalists believe that if you want to become one with your spirit, you need to go out into nature and you need to retreat to nature and allow nature to cleanse you. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson is going to write that humans are influenced by nature. And when nature is in turmoil, so are we. But when we come to the guy who's actually going to try to prove transcendentalism, we go to Henry David Thoreau. Now, Henry David Thoreau is what I guess I would call a disciple of Emerson. Thoreau is also a writer, he's an essayist, and Thoreau is going to buy a small cabin in the woods next to what is called Walden Pond. And for almost 2 years, Thoreau is going to write about his experiences in this cabin next to Walden's Pond. Now, Walden's Pond today is almost a cookbook for those who are thinking about going into transcendentalism. This video talks a great deal about Henry David Thoreau and the book Walden Pond. Well, Thoreau and Emerson had both spoke out against the war against Mexico, but both had spoken out against slavery. The abolitionists are becoming more and more vocal during this time period. This is also the time of Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster was a music composer, and Stephen Foster is going to write music for the banjo and the guitar, which are two instruments that we find in the United States that honestly we don't find in Europe. Many of the songs that Foster is going to write have become standards for today. If any of you all are big fans of the SEC, many of the SEC schools have adopted Foster's tunes for their particular state. This is also the time of public education. Now, Horace Mann believed in what became known as grade school. Now, public education had begun in the 1780s, but basically during this time period, you would go to school and teacher would give you an assignment. And when you had completed the assignment to the teacher's liking, then you would move on to the next assignment. Horace Mann said that wasn't exactly what he wanted. Horace Mann believed that we should challenge people of about the same age. So if you were 6 years old, Mann would say you should be in a class of 6 years old, and he began to grade the schools, grade the classes based on the age limit. Now, that's what we do today. Almost all schools, whether they be public or private or parochial, are based on your age and not so much your intelligence. Universal public schools became more and more the norm. Now, the way it works out is that in a new area, a particular piece of land would be set aside. And when somebody bought that land, the money for that land would be used to build a schoolhouse. Then everybody who lived in that school district who owned property would be required to pay a certain percent of the tax toward the schools. Now, for example, that's what happens here in Missouri. Your parents, if you own a home, your parents take the value of the home and they divide it by a third. Then for every $1,000 of that assessed evaluation, they pay a particular tax. So let's say, for example, that your parents had a home that was worth $100,000. For assessment purposes, it would be assessed at $33,000. Then that would be 33 times whatever the property tax is for the part of Cole County that you might live in. Now, each county has its own separate tax. Now, of course, here in Cole County, we have the Blair Oak School District, which has a different tax than, say, the Jefferson City School District. Prisons. Prisons are beginning to change as well. Now, prisons had almost always been public displays. So if you were a prisoner, you might be put in the stocks in the town square so that people could laugh at you, so people could jeer at you. But was this an effective way to rehabilitate the prisoners? Many people said no. Many people said that prisoners should be held in solitary confinement, that each prisoner would have his cell and that he would be placed in this cell. And as he went from cell to eat or cell to do a job or back, he would have to do this in silence. Now, people who have studied this say that this is probably the worst form of punishment you can have. Dorothea Dix. Dorothea Dix is going to talk about the mentally challenged. Now, for families who could afford it, they would keep their children or their parents or their older siblings in the home, and they would take care of them. But if you were too poor to do this, then the state would take over, and the state would put them in cages and literally treat them like animals. Dorothea Dix was appalled by this, and she wrote many essays as to why this is wrong. Dorothea Dix is going to call for the humane treatment of the mentally challenged. Now, it's not like anything that we have today. By today's standards, that which Miss Dix talked about would be considered very poor. But compared to the way they had been before Miss Dix, it was even worse. Lyman Beecher. Lyman Beecher is a minister, and Lyman Beecher is going to begin to preach from the pulpit about temperance. Now, temperance is where you do not drink. You do not drink, you do not associate with alcohol. Now, the way Beecher saw it, if you did not drink, then you would not become an alcoholic. Now, it doesn't quite work that way, but that's what Beecher talked about. Now, we're going to hear more about Lyman Beecher in the next lesson, or more, I should say, about his daughter. We're going to end today with the Shakers. Now, I had said that this was the time of the Second Great Awakening, and we had the Mormons and we had the Baptists. Now, another faith that is going to be created are the Shakers. The Shakers were begun by Mother Ann Lee. Mother Ann Lee believed in a simple life, a life that we practice with great joy. Now, Mother Ann Lee believed in transcendentalism, and so most of the services are going to be held outside. They do not believe in clergy, so there will not be ministers, but they also believe in original sin. Now, original sin is where a man and a woman are going to create a child. Now, because of this, the Shakers do not believe that you should have original sin. The Shakers do not believe in sex of any type. Well, obviously, if there's no sex of any type, there will not be any children. And Ann Lee is going to talk about the fact that the Shakers are going to get fewer and fewer and fewer, and then there will be a great revival and more people will come to join the Shaker faith. Do we have Shakers in the United States today? Yes, we do. But the Shakers will have large gatherings, and then they will die of old age, and then a new Shaker faith will come from that. Well, this here talks about one of the ladies who is part of the Shaker faith, and she tries to explain this. Now, I think this would be a good place for us to stop. Tomorrow, we're going to finish up lesson 13, and we're going to start lesson 14. We're also going to do a walkout worksheet. So if you are not with us in class tomorrow, that would be Tuesday, November the 17th, you need to go onto your Google Classroom to do the walkout worksheet because it'll be worth 5 points. Now, we should get done with lesson 14, excuse me, either by Friday of this week or Monday of next week. And then we'll have a quiz next week, either Monday or Tuesday. Remember, if you know for sure you can't be at the quiz, you need to let your parents contact me so we can make arrangements so that you can take the quiz at home. Goodbye.